Okay, so welcome everybody. My name is Stefania Bocconi. I am a researcher at the Institute for Educational Technology, which is part of the National Research Council of Italy. I'm very much honored and glad to be the chair of this open debate. And I really also thank you all for joining us, the panelists and also the audience. And I already invite you all to share and exchange any idea, experience, comment and thoughts about the topic of our two-day debate. So I'm going very briefly to introduce you to, okay, I hope you can see my screen very shortly. So after the keynote speech from Yves Punie, we will, which has presented a significant number of initiatives and also a lot of very interesting input and food for thought. So we will now try to put further the discussion and particularly looking into the essential elements and the essential components also for what is called competence-based learning, and particularly how this new approach that is being more and more uptaken also in curriculum renewal across Europe can facilitate European citizens as well as well-being and democracy. But first of all, I would like to introduce you the panelists of this open debate with a very different background, very much looking forward to their input. The first panelist is Yves Punie from the European Commission Joint Research Center. We heard his keynote speech before, and we really look forward to further exchange and discuss with Yves. The second panelist is Carlo Giovannella. Carlo is president of ASLERD as well as professor at the University of Roma to Vergata. The third panelist is Oscar Mealha. He is professor at the Department of Communication and Art at the University of Aveiro. Our next panel is Elin MCCallum. She's co-founder of Bantani Education, a non-profit organization which is very much active, we will see, directly from her in the field of competence-based education. Arianna Sala, one of my former colleagues, was with Punie. She is a project officer at the European Commission Joint Research Center. And Stefano Tirati will join us in a moment. He is founder of Learning Digital and also vice president of ASLERD, the European Forum of Technical and Vocational Education and Training. So very shortly before give the floor to the panelists, I just wanted to highlight how this panel will happen. We will have a first round from the panelists. We will have then a collection of your input, and then we will, if we will have still time, a second round of exchange with the panelists. During this panel, we will mainly try to, as I already mentioned, to concentrate and to exchange and reflect on visions, framework, key enabling factor to make the competence-based education effective and inclusive. And mostly we would like, we will try to exchange and reflect on those factors that can support and facilitate the effective implementation of competence-based education. We will also touch upon a very important aspect that was mentioned by the keynote about how to recognize and certify competencies, and also how the research can support and boost competence-based education. And before I give the floor to the panelists, I thought about just fleshing out and pointing out some of the key understanding, and the common understanding about competence-based education, and the fact that competence-based education, differently from content-based education, as we heard from the keynote, takes a really a different perspective, focusing much more on the learner, and mostly looking into the competence as an element constituted by three essential components: knowledge, skills, and attitude. And as you or probably know, there is no functional, cognitive functional model of how a competence can be acquired. So this means also that in terms of pedagogy, there is and training and professional development, there is a strong need to focus and boost and support the development of each component of the competence. And we saw already that the framework developed by European Commission are really try to provide a common understanding, common language, and common indicators to that look in this direction. So I go back to the panelists. So I would like to invite Carlo to start this first round with the panelists. We will leave Yves Punie first round for later on, just to allow him also to take a bit of brief after the keynote. So Carlo, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay. I'm trying to, in this first run, I'm trying to answer as much as possible from my point of view to the three questions that has been proposed by Stefania. And basically, I'll try to reflect shortly on three key issues that are represented here. So the first one is the need for integrated competence space. And the second one is the switch to the competence-based learning. That can be that can be include two sub teams: the teacher training and the process design, and then the last one is competency certification. Okay, so let's go to the first one: integrate competence space. This is probably is the formation of my background, but when I'm trying to look at the system, I try to let's say extract to the big vision of the domain, because I'm physicist, so I'm trying really to find out, let's say, the model of everything, so let's say. And because of that, I think that we need really an integrated reference system, because otherwise people will use will have some difficulties to use framework of reference, especially for example the teachers. So basically this is a quite standard let's say representation in which you have the hard skill that are those that can be considered domain specific, that are those that serve to form, to model, let's say, the work in a specific domain, and so cannot be defined by any framework, if not just a specific one. Then we have the second axis that in which I've represented the lives of skill, and that allow us to let's say to train, to form the person that has to live in a given society. So maybe help also to define the citizenship of people. And again, I have tried to schematize this in the past in order to have this, first of all, for me, and then of course can be used also for the others. And you see that I make a grouping of individual skill, social relational skill, and management skill. And of course, there are some subgroups. And you see that I have also represented in this slide the competence that are looked at the most by Italian companies, the orange rectangle, and also those that requested the most by English companies, that are all with the colored backgrounds subdivided in many different colors and classes. And also I reported here the life comp defined by, of course, by the the unit, European unit, research unit in Sweden. And well, in general, you see that everything can be mapped if we think to, but of course there are some differences and some critical issue that of course one has to think about. For example, just to mention one of this concerning the life skill, for me is quite difficult to see the well-being as really competences, because of course it's a very complex construct. And you can see here, for example, the definition of smartness or well-being represented by the ASLERD parameter, the one that we use to define the smartness, the well-being produced by a learning ecosystem, that of course include the smartness well-being defined by the Eurostat, and at the same time also the psychological individual well-being. So it's an integration of these two let's say these two definitions of well-being. So it's very complex. It's very complex construct. And then coming back on the third axis, you can find what I prefer to define digital soft skill with respect to the hard one that was a domain specific. And I've represented 3 of the 5 domain defined in Digicom 2.2, and I just put in between safety and tech problem solving, because really let's say at the border between the digital soft and domain specifics. And also in this case, sometimes there are some critical aspects that should be analyzed, because, for example, the data literacy that is very important actually can be considered a very complex construct that define a process, because in digital literacy is really a process that go through the identification of question and problem. At that point, you have to be able to design the data collection, to analyze the data that has been collected before, all to clean them, then interpret them, and of course then you have to give a representation, a possible also narration. So this just to make you the point about the need of an integrated competence space is easy to use it by all people. And then, of course, we come to the second point, that is the switch to the competence-based learning that need the teacher training. And just to give you an idea, my experience of years in teaching at the university, but also into the school, tell me that for teachers it's very difficult, for example, to prepare a card like this one, a descriptive card of a competence. So you can take whatever competence you like in this framework, and then you ask to the students or to the teacher to provide a description, and they have a huge amount of difficulties still to make a distinction between the knowledge that is the background to develop skills, and then that should be transformed in competences. And if you ask them to associate digital competence, the specific competence, as an amplifier of the life competence, this also creates a lot of problem to them. Of course, also assessment modality is not easy to define, and so on. Of course, you may understand why it's important to have let's say an integrated reference system, because then they have to try to define a descriptive card, and once that they will be able to do this, at that point they could pass to the process design. And of course, to bring the competence-based learning in a school is a very, as you see, is a very huge task, in my opinion, and also because to design a process is not easy. We have tried, of course, you have to define phase activities, you have to define methodologies, you have to define deliverable, you have to define our commitment, you have to define the competences that you expect to develop phase by phase. And indeed, we have tried to be very practical. We have tried to experiment with the school and teachers, for example, within the so-called PCTO, that are the path for development of competence, transversal competence that students has to undergo in Italian high school. And we have tried to develop a process based on a simulation innovation process. Of course, we came at the end, this is a very macro representation, but you see that for each phase, for each layer of the process, we have defined, these are only the macro area, but then you have to consider all the single competences. We have represented here how much those competence area is developed by each layer of the process. So, and this has been integrated after the outbreak of the COVID with collaborative smart working. So this was a chance also to integrate more and more digital competencies with a process that try to develop hard and also life competences. And I know that there are some, we have heard also from Yves that there have been several difficulties with the students, but actually my experience is quite positive one. And indeed, as you can see here, I mean, we have carried on this process for several years, and you see that year by year, year after year, the student satisfaction increased, and also we got a very high student satisfaction for the edition that has been done full, has been carried on fully online. So, I mean, certainly there are people that may have a problem with distance because they miss social engagement, social exchange, etc. But also they can really carry on a very nice project. And also they feel that they are able to acquire competence. So you see, I try to be very practical, and these are just 5 of the competences that they declare to have been able to develop. But just to give you a feeling of the effect that you can obtain on the student. And then let's come to the third and last point, because of course we should try to find the way to give value to this kind of process. And this can be done with competence certification. Well, first of all, I would like to distinguish between a certification and attestation. That this is two different things. Usually, the students in the Italian school got a piece of paper that attested them the potential development of competence, but there is no proof of that. So the idea was really to transform paper in an e-money that the students could spend on the job market. So because of this, we implemented a voluntary certification process, and we provided the student that passed the certification process with a blockchain anchored certificate, e-certificate, because this can be really put in their curriculum and they can be used on the job market. This is an example of the certificate that we provide them. Actually, we do not certificate, in this case, the single life competence or art competence, but we certificate a role. And while the competences were listed in the metadata, because of course this is a PDF file that contains hidden metadata. And the hidden metadata has been, that you can see here, are those that anyone can have a look at if we go on a validator application. And this has been done with full compliance with the guideline provided by the European approach to microcreditation report. So why is so important to implement these 3 steps? I mean, and also because basically this is the way in which we could try to go behind the industrial model of education. So the so-called factory line models, in which you have separate subjects, in which you have separate classes. And indeed, we may have the hope to make a transition from a standardized age-based classroom to multi-age competence-based classroom. Because what is important, in my opinion, in the school is really to, of course, to include people, but also not to let anyone behind. But at the same time, we have also to consider that there are some excellence, and we also have to cultivate the excellence. So, is right, in my opinion, it's correct that we pass from age-based classroom to multi-age competence-based classroom. And if we will succeed, of course, this could be an utopia, could be a project for, let's say, 20 years from now. But nevertheless, if you arrive there, sometimes, then you may have people that from the beginning of the school, from primary school, middle school, high school, or whatever will be at that time, because it could be just a competence school, let's say, will have a long life competence e-portfolio. And this can be filled year by year, month by month, with the new competencies that are developed. And of course, this will also prevent very stressful, for example, university admission exam, or very unclear job recruitment process, because at that point you can define the needed threshold of competences. And of course, if you have those competences that are trustably certificated, then all this process, admission to university, for example, job recruitment, can be really simplified. So this is more or less what I intend to say, just to give some, let's say, ideas of what could be in principle done. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Carlo. Very rich and very interesting set of input. I have a lot of comments, but I will keep for at the end of this round. So I invite you now, Oscar, to
Thank you, Stefania.
Share his input. Thank you.
I was announced as being a teacher at the University of Aveiro, which is correct, and thank you very much, Stefania. But I'll have to share that I also have 3 kids, so I'm involved in the parent associations for some time here at the Aveiro region, and I'm also involved in independent civic movements. So the citizens' perspective is something I will also try and bring in today for this collective reflection of ours. So it's not, of course, it's the university's perspective. It's something like, what are we trying to put up related with these competences? But also at a certain point, how industry is working with us, how the citizens look at look from their point of view. So this is implicit when I'm trying to give you the view of what's going on here in Aveiro University. Okay, so the first is related with the concept of competence. It's much easier to communicate. Okay, it's much easier to understand than speaking of courses and learning outcomes. It's easier for the students. It's easier for the citizens. It's easier for the hiring industry and most of the stakeholders. So of course it's implicit. At a certain point we'll have to explain that. But speaking of competences, and of course the accreditation of it gets us quickly to a standard, to a common concept. From that point of view, I think it's a win-win. Of course, when we're speaking of competence, we just saw a while ago the very utopia that Carlo can associate with us. We can all go on that. But for the moment, we still have the profession, a certain type of work. And when we are at that point, the issue is who chooses the competence. When we put like a learner-centered, there's a point in which the learner knows exactly what competences he's looking for. And most probably there's a point in which the experience the institutions have, namely higher education institutions, still have the experience to explain for a certain profession, for a certain type of work, there is a set of competences that certain learners should be engaged in. We already have models like major and minor, and all those competences fit well in any of those models that we can look at. And of course, this is also an opportunity, as we already mentioned, competence, knowledge, skills, and attitudes. And so this fits when we speak of competence from that point of view, and speaking once again with industry and citizens, it makes sense. And it makes sense to start working as a joint cooperation between the higher education institutions and their responsibility in all these issues, and of course industry and organizations. I'm putting here organizations because, as I told you, it's schools, municipalities, and there's a lot of other organizations that they aren't necessarily companies, and of course also have interest and also have are stakeholders of this process. And of course, what we all believe is we can improve the learner-centered process here. Okay. First of all, when we're speaking of competence and we look at what industry has been doing, we have a lot of organizations around that have been issuing certificates, and they continue to do it. Maybe a big issue here is that the higher education institutions were not doing that. That follow-up was being done much at a study cycle level, no? Masters or doctoral, or you can even enroll for a specific course, which is something complex, goes for a semester, a long time. And so here it's also an opportunity for the higher education institutions to really start looking at industry and organizations and understand how they can help from that point of view, coming from inside and collaborating with what is already going on. And so an opportunity, as we already heard from Yves a while ago, of upskilling, reskilling, and so on. Or we mustn't keep this out of focus, just an opportunity for someone to acquire a specific competence in a certain moment of life. In the lifelong learning process, for example, I would like to draw and master a visual language. Okay, start learning how to draw. So this is something that we have people asking for in university, you know, just a loose competence, a very specific loose thing that occurs in time. And university should be able to deliver this. I just forgot to mention in the beginning, I put up another icon there, you noticed, which is the European Consortium of Innovative Universities, which University of Aveiro belongs to. And our approach, I'll start detailing a little bit more, of course, has to do with this European university opportunity. University of Aveiro belongs to this network. Actually, it belongs to the European Consortium of Innovative Universities for a long time, but they put in the project for the European University that was approved. And so we are now this European University Consortium also. And most of what I'm sharing with you is at an is also being, is happening at an international level, okay, inside the ECIU network as ECIU University. And so, answering the three questions that Stefania, there were the teasing questions for us. So the first one, what are we doing then? So we identified micro modules. As teachers inside universities, we are used to working with modules inside our courses, so nothing new there. We just have to understand how that can be organized and to be really delivered as a competence. And how can it be certified? Well, we inside this European project, and it's for us, it's been quite straightforward. It's a micro credential. What can we associate to this as a higher education institution? So as a micro module, it can be 1, 2, or 3 European credits in the European credit transfer system. And that also gives you the workload for the micro module, which as an outcome will have some kind of competence associated to it. So, and of course, registered as a micro credential. And what's important here is it can be done by a higher education institution alone, or why not in a joint partnership with companies, organizations, and this starts to be interesting at this point, okay? How can the implementation of competence-based education be supported? Well, as I was mentioning a while ago, this is integrated in the ECIU network. And so I believe this relation with industry and organizations here can be extremely important, also in terms of sustainability and keeping updated with what is being needed. Progress and new knowledge progress is not taking place only in universities. Okay, we have, I think this has to be clear for everyone also. Universities or research institutions. Inside many companies, you also have important research taking place and new knowledge coming out from there. And of course, putting this into place takes us to get sometimes into different management paradigms also. We have courses going on. We have curriculums that are set up. Academia has specific timetable, semesters or whatever. And so now we also have these isolated micro modules related with some kind of competences that we also have inside. So this is not an easy thing to do. Okay, we are speaking of the same staff, we are speaking of the same teachers, we are speaking of the same space, and we are speaking of the same timetable. Active learning process is something we normally get into place when we are speaking of competence-based education. Just for an example, challenge-based learning, one of the last exercises we did here in Aveiro was industry put out the challenges, okay? And then we put in the micro modules and the students in the micro module that enrolled in the micro modules trying to cope with the challenge-based learning process and all the challenges that our industry put in for them. This teaching time to cope with active learning process, at least here in Portugal and in our universities, it's not something that we are managing very well. So normally teachers to really perform well in managing these active learning processes need much more time than what university expects them to be using. And last but not least, I'm going through this very quickly, but then of course we'll have time to deepen some things a little bit more, and I'll leave that part for the questions and discussion. So, and how can targeted research and exchange of knowledge contribute how can targeted research and exchange of knowledge contribute to advance competence-based education? So here, research and development activities, we already develop a lot of this with external partners. Okay, so a lot of our research is done with specific partners, and this helps to issue the delivering of new knowledge as a contribution for these joint research activities. This, in fact, potentiates competence updates, and that's something a lot of people are looking for, the updates, the upskills or reskills, and this helps to identify what we can do as university alone or in joint partnerships. And of course, and this is also opportunities for others to learn with us at University of Aveiro and the ECIU University. So the higher education institution research and development partners and learning tend to be more directly coupled. It's not something that you expect universities to do alone, from our perspective at least, and mainly related with specific competence updates. When it gets to really updating specific competences, I know Yves shared most of the classical competences, now contextualized in digital technology mediated scenarios. But of course, there are also other older competences that we already called social soft skills or social-emotional competences and so on. But besides those, of course, we have all the others that have been adding on for decades. And now we are at this digital point. Besides this, of course, when I mention competence here, we can be speaking of very specific competences and even transferable competences that are things that one scientific area, like Carlo was mentioning a while ago. So, and this really helps to transfer a competence that is very clear in one scientific area that can be extremely useful for someone that is really doing his job in some other scientific area or technical area. So thank you very much for your time. This is just a quick go through what we are doing, my very personal opinion, as I mentioned, as a teacher at University of Aveiro, as a parent, and as a citizen at the Aveiro region. Okay, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Oscar. Again, very, very rich and interesting input. I really look forward to the next part of this debate. But for now, thanks a lot. Now I kindly ask Arianna to share her thought the first round. Thank you, Arianna.
Thank you, Stefania. Thank you for inviting me to join this SLERD conferences. Can you hear me? Can you see the slides?
Yes, Arianna. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm Arianna Sala. I'm a researcher at the Joint Research Center of the European Commission, and we'll argue why competence framework matter to transform education and also to foster citizenship and well-being among citizens. So transformation and innovation of the education system has been a priority for many years. And we know, as Carlo was pointing some minutes ago, that school and more broadly the education and the system, as we know them today, are the product of the Industrial Revolution. So they have been designed to prepare the labor force to fit the industrial age and contribute to the growth of their nation as fast as possible. In such idea of education, students are regarded as passive receptor of the knowledge that has to be transmitted by the teachers, and were expected also to faithfully reproduce that knowledge. If we look at the results of the TALIS 2018 that collected a view of 260,000 teachers over 48 OECD countries, we can see traces still of this way of understanding education. For example, less than half of the lower school teachers declare that they frequently use teaching strategy that in the OECD terminology produce cognitive activation. That is, teaching strategies that stimulate the higher order competencies as critical thinking, problem solving, decision making, etc. Thus, being still more common teacher-centered practice in which students mainly have a passive stance. However, in the past 150 years, the world has changed at a faster pace than ever, and the pursuit of the growth at all costs lead us not only to a new age, the digital age, but also to a new era, no? The Anthropocene, in which the activity of the human being is the recognized root cause of phenomena such ocean acidification, biodiversity loss, which are threatening the survival of the planet, our survival on the planet. So if 150 years ago the industry needed a worker that could work 14 hours in a factory line, now we need problem solver, creative thinker, change makers that are able to, let's say, face the challenges of the 21st century. So teaching people knowledge that serve to reproduce the status quo without shifting the purpose of education toward a deep transformation of this status quo is not only short-sighted, but potentially suicidal. So how can this change happen? We consider that we must transcend this disciplinary approach and put much more emphasis on competence that can empower citizens to lead the transition toward a fairer and more sustainable way of living for all. So we consider also that competence-based education enhanced by the strategic and the meaningful use of digital technology has the potential to convey this change, because as Carlo was saying before, competence-oriented education lead to acquiring a combination of knowledge, skill, and attitude that can be personalized and individualized to create individualized learning paths that are also can contribute to self-fulfillment and self-satisfaction through education. Also, it focuses more on learning outcome and mastery, shifting the spotlight from what is taught to what is learned. And that's the potential to break silos, fostering interdisciplinary education, and also to promote a smoother transition from school to work. So as Yves explained some minutes ago, we developed several frameworks ranging from digital competence, the DigComp, to sustainability competence, the GreenComp, to entrepreneurial competence, EntreComp, and the personal, social, and learning to learn competence, the LifeComp. The value of this framework is to create this common language and also the possibility they allow for contextualization, translation, and adaptation to local different reality. So moreover, we developed also support tools, support material to help the teacher and educator in fostering key competence through their daily educational practice, sharing exactly best practice, sharing MOOCs, guidelines in different formats. But let me zoom in very quickly on LifeComp. The colleague Oscar also was referring before to the social emotional competencies. As you know, LifeComp is the European framework for the personal, social, and learning to learn competence, described 9 competences that are in literature identified as social emotional skill or non-cognitive skills or soft skills. And we argue that those are competences that are learnable and teachable lifelong and life-wide, and not personality traits, no? Which is put us in a very different perspective with regard of the possibility of a lifelong learning of those competencies. So we span from the ability to self-regulate our emotion, thoughts, and behavior, to the capacity to empathize and collaborate and communicate in a respectful way, but also to be critical thinker, innovative thinker, problem solver, and people able to self-direct their learning in a lifelong perspective. So if we think at the past 2 years, it is evident how important those competencies have been for all of us, no? How important it has been to be able to self-regulate our emotion or take care of our well-being, social, physical, and mental well-being. And also, if we see the phase of the technological advance, it is evident that it's important that we today form students that we are able to keep learning and to work in the future with tools that are still to be invented. You know? So on the one side, what we argue is that coping with the uncertainty, ambiguity, volatile situation that the 21st century is facing us with has a personal cost that in turn can revert in a social cost if we see the increase, for example, in mental health issue in the general population. And also we argue that those costs, personal and social, can be mitigated by training, because what the research on social emotional learning show us is that when those competencies are deliberately promoted through education, we assist to an improvement in student well-being and mental health, in academic success and a decrease of early school leaving, but also in an improvement in student employability and better salaries, an improvement in the school climate and in the satisfaction of teachers. So we consider that it's particularly important to foster those competencies in education and to support teachers and educators in this, in bridging the gap among theory and practice. We are going to publish in the next few weeks a technical report, Life Comp into Action, which will contain general guidelines and teaching strategies to foster, to create a learning environment that has create the possibility for those competencies to flourish, to be honed by students. So the guideline will provide a recommendation on how to design, implement, and formatively assess a learning experience that foster life comp. Identify also the main barrier and main drivers, and give guidance on how to foster life competence without promoting or prompting a specific program of social emotional learning, and also can be employed in different social cultural settings and adapted to different age group and curricular area. Moreover, and more specifically, we also provide a list of 16 research-based and learner-centered teaching strategies to foster life competencies transversally. It means that we don't suggest a teaching strategy to teach empathy, but we suggest a teaching strategy to teach geography in a way that enhance and enable collaboration, communication, empathy, managing on learning, or the capacity of giving peer feedback, etc. No? Leveraging also the capacity of the students, of the peers, also envisioning this shared responsibility of the teaching process, that is not only on the teacher but also on the students. No? So for each teaching strategy, we provide indication on the learning environment, on the group size, of the time needed for the activity, the target group, and a step-by-step indication on how to implement those teaching strategies. We are also promoting an integrated approach to the teaching of different sets of competencies. We are developing a card deck to support the creation of learning activity for the joint promotion of key competence that will help teacher designing learning activity that mix entry-comp, beach-comp, life-comp, and green-comp, and also a resource bank of 25 teaching strategy, learning strategy for the joint promotion of key competence in vet education. And to conclude, also referring to the third area that Carlo was referring to at the beginning, we are also promoting teacher training, teacher with massive online open courses. We are promoting a series of 3 courses for teachers. And the idea is that those online courses are developed by teachers and for teachers, offer practical example to implement in the classroom. For example, if we want a teacher to implement a teaching strategy, that teaching strategy is also employed in the online course in a way that the teacher has to experiment the teaching strategy as a student before he has or she has the opportunity to invite their student to follow a similar approach. No? So we have these 3 courses along 22 this year. And to conclude, we are working to promote European well-being through educational guidance and resources for the competence-based education, with the final goal to ensure that citizens acquire the necessary transversal skills and competence to be empowered to participate and contribute to a resilient and innovative society and economies. And that's all from my side. Many thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Arianna. Really, thanks a lot. Again, a lot of very interesting and important input. So thanks a lot. And now I kindly ask Elin MCCallum to take the floor and share her input. Thanks a lot, Elin.
So interesting to hear from everybody. I'm a bit like, ooh, there's some seriously brainy academic minds out there, which I've learned from today, because I really think that this work, this idea of competence, I think sort of it comes down to supporting humans to kind of get through life, supporting humans to find, discover, understand their potential, and find their way through their social environment, their economic environment, their environment, their planet. So I think I kind of have been evolving what I was going to say as I've been listening to everybody. But perhaps, can everybody see my screen now?
Yes, thank you.
Great. So I'm going to just take you through a little bit about perhaps my perspective on this, and then some of the work we're doing to support competence-based education. So to introduce myself, I run Bantani Education. We're a non-profit. We're based in Belgium. We've got colleagues across different countries, and we work in many different countries on entrepreneurial learning. But we come at this from life skills. We come at this from a very broad understanding of let's explore what competencies people need to be able to understand, develop their own potential. And we come at it very much from an SDGs perspective. We want to empower young people, old people, any people to see their way to understand their potential, their pathway to having impact on these big global aims that feel so massive, yet we can have a concrete impact on it at a personal level, at a community level, and at a country and organizational level, whichever level we look at. So this is the sort of the backbone of when I think about competence-based education. We need to empower people to live, work, survive, be resilient, have ideas, be creative, imaginative, curious, confident, and feel empowered that they can contribute something to the future of our planet, because it is our planet that we need to talk about now, and to be able to live in this digital world, to be able to navigate their way through that, understand their perspectives, their place, their netiquette, through that lens of digital life. We've got a young man working with us at the moment, and a colleague asked him, have you got a bank card? No, I've just got a phone. That's it. You know, and I was like, but I'm 48. I've got a bank card. I haven't got a phone. I can't tap my phone. I should. I just haven't managed to connect it. This is it. You know, we're all different. But this is where, you know, different people, different stages of their life, it's like countries are at different starting points. People are at different starting points, as Yves presented in his keynote earlier. But I think what we're talking about, it is competencies that empower and enable. And we have defined and we're trying to understand these better through the frameworks that we're creating: EntreComp, LifeComp, DigComp, GreenComp, and one that perhaps hasn't been mentioned, which is a particular favorite of mine, which is the RFCDC, the Reference Framework of Competencies for Democratic Culture, which underpin the citizenship competence within those 8 key competencies at European level. Developed by Council of Europe. And when we look at these competencies, you can see why, how, where they can drive life. They can drive people and planet as individuals or communities in order to see their way through. And that these are competencies. These include the definitions of what we should be able to develop through formal education, perhaps through co-curricular, extracurricular, but also core curricular education and learning that my children who are 8, I was listening to you, Oscar, saying, you know, I'm a parent. Absolutely. I'm driven through what I want my nieces and nephews and my children to have through their learning experience. So these competencies that will empower, will enable them in a world that we know is what? Constantly changing, exponentially changing. You know, people don't have bank cards anymore. And so I just wrote this. This is it. This is my answer. I've got more slides, but we need to make these competencies understood. We need to make them relevant, understood through the frameworks, yes, but understood beyond that. A framework is a book, a piece of paper. DigComp is doing some amazing work to really get that out there. Selfie, fantastic tool. We've done work with EntreComp, with entrepreneurial learning to try and get that out there. We now need to understand, and this is being done by JRC through Scaffold and other initiatives like To Be Digital, how to really combine and understand these, how we can co-work all of this just to create, what is it? A decent holistic education, a decent holistic lifelong learning process. We need to make it relevant. Not everybody wants to learn how to do high-level mathematics, but everybody needs to function in a world where they can use a computer, they understand what digital is and means, and they can use the mathematics they need to get through life. Make it relevant, make it real life relevant, make it engaging. A few people have mentioned the pedagogies that we need to change to use really a more engaging approach in order to appeal to more learner styles. It's not just going to be, I was listening to a debate yesterday on academic versus vocational, and I don't know if anybody's heard of Eton in the UK. It's a very expensive, posh public school. The ex-headmaster of Eton was saying everybody should do a vocational qualification, a vocational channel, because it's all about problem solving. It's all about learning creatively. Whereas perhaps in the UK particularly, you know, learning history is not necessarily a very creative process. And these are skills and competencies that we need to find. We need to put into education. We need to enable people to learn these also digitally, also with relevance to understanding the sustainability of our planet and the impacts through which that can happen. But the last two are probably most important. Make it valued. Competence-based education, these competences that we're talking about, are not valued in the education system. In my experience across many countries, they are not valued. They are not assessed. They are not explicit. They are implicit. They are curriculum key competencies. They're cross-curricular competencies. They're there, but they're not priority. It's not what the high stakes examinations really see at the end that they want to value. Maybe it is in early years and in primary, but you get to secondary, vocational, university. These are not the competencies that are valued, that come out at the end and you say, well, actually, you did really well because you're a great team worker. You can really collaborate. You can plan an activity and you can bring everybody in, and you overcame conflict and you had ideas and you made mistakes, but you worked out how to overcome them. You know, it's not that. I'm not saying that knowledge-based curriculum is wrong. I'm saying that what we need to look at is making these competencies as valued. That's why the headmaster of Eton said vocational tracks should be compulsory. But he also said It won't work though, because parents don't accept them. Universities don't accept them as valued. They're not as valued as knowledge and academia based curriculum, which is the traditional approach. Make it system level, because we say teachers need to change. We need to change how teachers teach. Well, actually, do we? No, we need to change how we value education, how we value the outputs of education, because that will drive the change in education. That will drive the learning experience that my children have, because it will be more creative, because creativity is valued, alongside them understanding the historical context of where they are, who they are, and where the world around them has come from, what it's resulted from, and where it might go. But that's really important, to make it system level. And how we value our education is by often results, maybe dropouts, yes, but it's not by the community spirit or the engagement that they've had, not by the collaborative, creative imagination, curiosity, emotional learning that has really been developed through that course. Yet, these are the qualities that industry, business, and are really saying is necessary going forward. We can teach a bit of knowledge in some jobs, not every job. I want a doctor to know their stuff, but we need to have the value placed on these competencies, these broad, empowering, enabler competencies, digital, green, life, Entrecomp, all of them that are in there. They cross over, they mix, there's duplication. But broadly speaking, I call it being an entrepreneurial citizen. You know, but you use the word entrepreneurial, you often turn people off. So I speak more broadly here, but I've changed what I was going to say from listening to everybody else. So and this is where we need this common language around what we're talking about. That's what the frameworks have designed, because if we look at competence-based education, we need that common language. And this is an illustration of how many different phrases and words are used for entrepreneurial learning. It can be very, very confusing sometimes to find that single term, that common language, especially across the sort of 24 member languages in the EU, for example. But we have, I think, ways and means. When I look at Selfie is a huge community of activity of people that are bringing this together. And there are huge numbers of interested people really wanting to explore how to make these competencies relevant. And this is what's driven much of our work towards the Entrecomp community. And the Entrecomp community we have purposely made to be actually very broad. We have called it the Entrecomp community because that's what's initially bringing people together. It's an identifier. It's very much something that people recognize now. Increasingly, we look at Erasmus+, there's around 400 or 500 projects that are Entrecomp explicit. The Entrecomp community really is about bringing people together to connect, learn, share, and recognize. And this is a conglomeration of many different organizations, many different project initiatives linking into it, and a lot of different activity going into it and developing gradually, entrepreneurially, because there's no real concrete funding behind it. But we're working with many different partners to try and bring this together in order to create community forums on these themes that link to the priorities that we want to explore, to try and say, how do we co-work these competencies? How do we make these competencies relevant to themes that are priority for our society, for our economy? How can we encourage discussion, learning, connection? How can we create events, hackathons, study visits around all of this with different partners? These are the ones that are involved. This is funded through a DG Grow COSME initiative, these particular community forums. We've also got a big digital library where we try and bring in a variety of resources and add to it every week. We also then have that searchable by these themes in order to try and understand this breadth of relevance, to ensure that we understand competencies as empowering, enabling across a variety of sectors. And every element of this is mapped to the SDGs. Every resource is mapped to the SDGs. We have microlearning and MOOCs in order to open that up, in order to encourage people and help them understand and show their work by bringing it in through these MOOCs, that the breadth of relevance And we also have the badge pathway for individuals and for organizations. And this will be expanding over the coming months in order to move towards additional levels of engagement. Many thanks for this, but this is something that in order for competence-based education to be supported, to be successful, we need to have that understanding, the relevance. It needs to be active and engaging. It needs to be valued at system level and through this community and through other activities that are out there. I hope that we can get to a stage where actually we see an education system, particularly a compulsory education system, where these competencies are explicit, are valued at both school level, teacher level, but also at system level, because that's where we've got to make the change. And I think this is where these frameworks that we have help that, but we've got a long way to go to change the system. It's not yet there. Sorry, I literally have been responding to everybody else, and thank you very much for this opportunity. I forgot to say that at the beginning. It's a really interesting topic. So yes, hopefully that was useful.
Thank you so much, Elin. I mean, thank you very much. As I was saying before, you are really sharing with us a lot of great input. You're making my work very much easier and very much difficult, because it's so rich, the input that you are providing. It's going to be very much challenging to wrap up, but thank you very much. Now I saw that there is also Stefano Tirati, the other panelist, who has joined us. So I would invite Stefano as well to share his input for the first round.
Thank you very much for allowing me to join a little bit later. Unfortunately, I got only the last contributions from colleague hearing, very interesting, and in fact it is very much in line with what some of the inputs I would like to share. So first of all, Stefano Tirati, I'm very pleased to be here. Here you see two logos, Learning Digital, which is my organization. I'm a pedagogue working on digital environments, supporting digital transition. And I'm also active in EFET, which is European Forum for Vocational Education and Training, whom I have the honor to serve as Vice President on projects. So you will see contributions and ideas and concrete examples from a practitioner's perspective. So hands-on examples. So first of all, congratulations, Stefania and the organizing team, for the questions. Very relevant and difficult. They seem so straightforward, but actually is not very easy, but very relevant. So indeed, I will try to answer to each of them with some examples. So the first aspect I would like to showcase is, the question is, when we want to implement a competence-based education, in terms of content, where should we focus? So very much in line with what the previous speaker was saying, I think our priorities should be the digital and green transitions. Here you see the logo of a project led by UNESCO UNEVOC. UNEVOC is the agency of UNESCO responsible for vocational education and training. And this project is called BUILT, assembling these different dimensions: digitalization, greening, and actually there is a convergence. We should promote digital skills in order to apply them to solve environmental challenges, plus societal changes and trends like migration. As you see, maybe it's small, maybe you cannot see it properly. And the other pillar is, of course, entrepreneurship. So in terms of content, very much in line with what has been said. This is the first input. Another input is a reflection we made within EFET. We have sort of working groups called the thematic teams. One of them is called VET 4.0. The question is, what will be the education in the future? And these colleagues have been working and devising these four scenarios under two axes. One axis is either the education, the training is degree-based toward on-demand training. So in a way, well structured and in a way static or not as flexible versus on-demand training. And the other one is either mainly publicly funded toward open market. So the first is business as usual, and the last, the most far away, but may eventually not so far, is a scenario where education is led by big corporations. So we may say that the next Google is an ed tech company. So something to reflect on. Another aspect is a skills ecosystem. So in vocational education and training in particular, we talk about skills ecosystems, having all the different parts, which are not stakeholders, they are shareholders, each of them playing their own role. So individuals assuming the ownership of their lifelong learning career pathways. Of course, having the educational providers being flexible and open. Of course, policy setting and creating legal frameworks that are key enabling factors instead of being bottlenecks. And lastly, but not least, companies that cannot sit and wait that the education system deliver the right skills. They need to be absolutely in line, involved in all the activities, in providing all the support and contribution to the training pathways. Of course, skills ecosystems very much in line with the local regional characteristics. That's why we talk about smart specialization strategies. So these skills ecosystems should have very clear where we want to go based on our traditions and our characteristics, strengths and weaknesses, and enable all the actors to play their role. Another contribution is from a non-formal and informal education sector. We need to recognize that something very interesting is happening. This is a first example of an initiative from Armenia. So I would like to take this opportunity to stimulate the reflection that in Europe we have this Eurocentric approach. We think we are the best and that we can go around and teach everyone. But actually, we need, I believe, to be very attentive to interesting and really outstanding initiatives around us. For instance, this one now is present in 9 countries, if I'm not mistaken, including France, Germany, and others. Maybe I can manage to swap. This is okay. Their website, a very interesting activity, enabling digital skills, technological skills, and design for free to kids under 18 with a challenge-based approach around 14 key dimensions, including animation, video, 3D modeling, graphic design, different aspects. And going back to the slide, what I just wanted to say is that I actually saw one of these 2 more centers in France, and this, you will not believe, this picture in an open space, 150 kids aged between 13 and 15, all focused. You could not hear a mosquito flying. This is, I think, an outstanding, can you imagine 150 kids in one room, what kind of noise they would do? They were all very focused, very attentive, doing peer learning activities with very few tutors working together on these dimensions. Another aspect is, positive example is Ecole 42, again in the digital skills domain. Another activity which I think now involves more than 40,000 learners, 40,000 learners and no teachers. I mean, of course, speakers, events, but no classroom. Buildings which are open 24 hours, technology available, problem-based training, again, free of charge, very inclusive, with a number of campaigns directed to, for instance, girls, to involve them in digital training through what they call a swimming pool is the first phase that you jump in, and with no requirement of prior knowledge or prior qualifications, 100% job placement afterwards. If we are educators, if we are sitting comfortably in our universities or vet centers, we need to look at these initiatives, because they completely have a completely different business model, which is very effective and bringing very good results. So another aspect, when you ask, dear Susanna, how can the implementation of competence-based education be supported? Indeed, individual learning accounts is a key milestone in this process, and there are a number of countries very active in this, namely one among others, France, who in 2018 introduced this reform, which enables any adult in France with a mobile phone app and a fiscal code email. You just register in the email and you are credited 500 euros that you can spend on your own upskilling or reskilling. And these, of course, have entailed a number of interesting developments, like having one national register of education providers, one national database of training offers. It seems, basic aspect, but we don't have in Europe. It's very difficult in Italy, anywhere, to have this kind of framework. Okay, so second question, I'm going through the presentation. Second question, how should the competence be recognized and certified? So again, very much in line with what has been said, we are lucky in a way. We have a number of competence frameworks, very comprehensive, very articulated. I heard the presentation, the last part of the presentation on EntreComp has been mentioned, Green Comp, Life Comp. I think previous speakers have been talking about other competence frameworks. So indeed, I think this is one starting point if we want to be effective. Link our activities to these European competence frameworks, eventually decline them according to, of course, the specific needs, characteristics. For instance, we are now working with the University of Bremen, for example, on DigComp Edu adaptation for vet teachers and trainers on specific sectors. So, of course, I will be pleased to share information about this initiative, but this is one dimension. Another interesting development I would like to mention is micro-credentials. So, of course, as you see in the graph, from all the school diplomas, long-lasting activities, which of course are important, but eventually we can envisage smaller certifications that are addressed to specific units, specific modules, specific core competencies, which builds upon and lead to formal big qualifications that we are used to have. And this, I believe, is an interesting development because can bring a number of benefits, including greater flexibility, better completion rates, immediate usability. And some countries like Australia are leading this process. And in Europe, we need to dedicate attention on this as well, as we are doing already with European Commission recommendations and the work accomplished by CEDEFOP and other agencies. And then last question, how can targeted research and exchange of knowledge contribute to advanced competence-based education? So indeed, one key aspect is data. Especially in vocational education and training, we miss applied research on our activities, and we need to boost this culture and eventually cooperation with research institutes in order to monitor more closely what is happening and enable key players to take decisions based on data. This is another example of a tool, a forecast exercise that we used within EFIT, is delivered by a Finnish provider, Futures Platform, and is a artificial intelligence powered foresight radar. So basically, maybe it's small, you cannot see properly, but I have maybe the next slide is a little bit better. So what is interesting from this tool, which I think World Economic Forum is also offering to its members. What is interesting is that under one focus, you can identify different dimensions. Like, for instance, in this case, they were, as I said, working on the future of education. So they identified 5 dimensions: industry change, organizational change, technology change, global changes, and society changes. And under each of these 5 dimensions, they identified different phenomena going from the center to more forward-looking out to the border of the radar. And basically by color, they tells if this phenomena is growing or is decreasing. And the artificial intelligence activity is scraping the internet and providing under each of these pillars circular economy rather than urbanization, rather than AI that writes itself, as I read here around the phenomena. The artificial intelligence activity is to scrape the internet and provide under each of the phenomena videos, articles, publications, research relevant to that topic, so that if you want to focus more, you can just click and get all the information. So I think I just wanted to share this because I think we don't do enough foresight activity. And also in education, maybe it's more used to in economic sector, business sectors, and so on. But also in education, very much this exercise is very relevant. We should do more. So last comment is a call to action. We need to dare to innovate. This is a picture I took last year in a chocolate company in Austria. Zotter, a worldwide famous chocolate maker, who stimulate his employees to innovate in their chocolate. But sometimes innovation is not successful, like peanuts and ketchup didn't work. So they made a cemetery of dead ideas. So my call to action to me and to all of us is that we need to dare to innovate, even if this sometimes is not successful. If we don't dare, then we go nowhere. So thank you very much, Stefania and the organizers, for this opportunity to share some ideas on this very interesting topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stefano, really, again, for very, very interesting and stimulating input to the discussion. So I really thanks all the panelists, because I mean this first round was very, very much rich of ideas, example, and before going to collect the input from the audience, I would like, I mean, just to point out 2 or 3 elements that I just recognize across all your interesting contributions. And basically the fact that, I mean, there is this need also, and that is already emerging from several initiatives we have seen today, to get this more holistic view over the different kind of competencies and aspects. And I would take the Elin very, very interesting starting of her presentation, when she said how, I mean, a way to definitely support competency-based implementation is to make it understood. And I mean, I agree with the fact that the new framework that have been elaborated by the Commission really help to make this understanding in more clear, to define the characteristics of these of these competencies, but as was also pointed out by Carlo, by other panelists, there is also more and more the need to start having a more connected, more linked view over all these kind of different competencies, which are by nature very much interlinked. But still, I mean, there is a need, particularly in the education field, to start also outline more and more the strong connection over all these specific competence. And definitely also about the understanding of this competence, which is crucial for the implementation of competence-based education. And other elements that emerged strongly from the panelists was the need to help teachers design innovative pedagogical approaches, which really can support the development of these different aspects of the competence. I mean, if we intend as a unique one dimension, and mostly for the specific one. And then another elements very much important that has emerged, which is related to the education context, is definitely to give recognition of this competence. We heard about micro-credentials and blockchain approaches, but definitely, again, it's a matter of valuing also and give value at all level of the system, starting even from the individual to this kind of recognition, to the importance of being able to not only, I mean, to define a kind of individual path across all these competencies, but also to be able to identify effective elements for their certification, to make this competence also certified and visible. These are very, very few points with respect to all the interesting and much, much more rich input that the panelists gave to us. But I would like now to ask and to give, I mean, the opportunity to the audience to bring some question to the panel. So I invite the audience participants as well to share their question, their comments, their feedback.
I can share a concern that I have. The panelists talked about competence, the focus of the competence learning, and it has the advantage of having a much more personalized approach to meet the motivations and keep the balance what is asked also, and what is needed at the moment. But also there is a disadvantage in terms of the I may not know what I need at the moment, and choose the path that is more comfortable to me. And as we are living in a time that much is needed, there are so many demands, and we have to be always at the upfront to have that certain knowledge to meet the expectancies and challenges that are arising. My concern is that we can compromise the democratic aspect of having equal opportunities for everyone, because of so much personalization and so much choices. So achieving the balance between these two approaches is something that this discussion arises, and I know that is not a solution out there, a perfect, but That's the thought that the concern that I share.
Thank you very much, Liliana. Definitely a very crucial point what you just, I mean, share with us to find, I mean, really a balance and to help the individual to recognize and identify learning needs and competence needs. And
if you allow me, Stefania.
Yes.
So I think the comment was very good indeed, and I think Liliana, you already somehow provided the answer to your concern, no? Because it is indeed about a balance between these different approaches. So, because if you say, okay, personalized, self-regulated learning, more personalized line of learning, that does not mean, in my opinion at least, that we move from one extreme to the other. You know, it does not mean that we now move from, you know, typical classroom-based collective kind of learning to completely individualized sole and independent and personalized kind of self-regulated learner from the learning side. I mean, that I think would probably not the best view. Not the views indeed that, I mean, these are complementary, and the balance is the right word that you phrased. No, I mean, of course, then it still depends that how you balance these two. No, but I would very much agree with you that, I mean, it's not productive to have kind of a black and white kind of view on that. You know, it's not from the one extreme to the other, and this is actually related to the bigger discussion that I had kind of a comment listening also to the really excellent contributions from the other panelists. Now, is that I mean, speaking about, I mean, the shift to competence-based learning, is a kind of a similar kind of philosophy from my point of view. So this is not a shift from one extreme, which is the traditional knowledge-based kind of paradigm, to a new paradigm where we forgot about the old one, which is completely competence-based kind of learning. There again, I think we need to emphasize that these need to go together. I mean, it would be naive to assume, of course, that there's no knowledge-based education anymore to be done. But it would also be naive to assume that it's only about knowledge-based education, no? So, and I think it's the combination of both. And I think we have to emphasize the complementarity between traditional knowledge-based kind of approaches, which we still need to foment in education, but also the acquisition of transversal competences and much more competence-based kind of learning experiences. I think that this complementarity is really, really important to highlight from my point of view. Thank you.
Thank you, Yves. I see that there are some participants. I mean, we are approaching the end of the panel time slot, unfortunately, because I mean, there are so many input and things that could still be discussed. So, but there is, are there any other questions from the audience? I saw before someone who was opening the microphone.
Yes, I would like to add something, because I totally agree with the last panel words. I've recently been to Finland because of Erasmus, and I studied their curriculum and their society. And in my opinion, it would these things of competencies of modules is applied in that society from the beginning, from the primary school or even before. And this is a changing of mentality. We should change our way of living, and to apply to apply this way of teaching. In this way, changing our way of living, we can change our education and our curriculum. And because that society, sorry, can you hear me? Sorry. Okay, that society is much more democratical in the way they apply competencies, they apply cooperative learning, and they totally include all the special educational need children in their schools and in their society. And so in a way to work with competencies, we work for everyone, for every kind of, and we go above inclusion. We go farther than it is not an inclusive. They don't speak about an inclusive educational system. They speak about something farther. So this the way of working with competencies is the right path, in my opinion, because it goes to a changing in our way of living and in our society. It's not just a changing in education.
Thank you very much, Flavia, for having pointed out also these very important elements. I would invite, if there are no other questions from the audience. Elin, thank you very much for sharing on the chat also this very nice example. I mean, the link that we can use to look much more into this aspect, and the link between the competent trainer. And ask Yves if you would like. Yves, would you like to share with us your comments, your input, and then I will go through the other panelists. Thank you, Yves.
Thank you, Stefania. Very briefly, a couple of reflections, which I think that might not have been discussed so much, and which could be highlighted. So, well, the first one I think I already mentioned, because the people also mentioned, you know, the relevance of these frameworks and the reference and the common language they provide to enable us to deal with all these competences, no? And I think that that's very important, and we are very grateful, of course, that so many people are using and referencing and putting these frameworks into practice. That is really, really important. And what we also try to do is, indeed, as Elin highlighted, is to try to make the connections between the different frameworks. And so what she called also the co-working of the different frameworks. And we are now developing a deck of cards, is kind of a practical tool like playing cards, where we have all the competences from Green Comp, from Live Comp, from Intercomp and DigComp, as all the individual kind of competences, and then develop or explain on these cards for each competence how they link to other competences, how they link to the other frameworks, and also give details of teaching activities and teaching strategies to teach these competences. Because this was the second point I wanted to raise, what maybe in the discussion has been not so much highlighted, which I think that what we really need also is guidelines and support for teachers and academics to go for competence-based kind of teaching and learning. Because we can assume that they are able to do that, but I think that's a wrong assumption. I mean, and they need help, they need support to be able to do that. But at the same time, and it comes back what I also said during my keynote, we also need to be able to prove to them the added value, which will also Elin said about bringing value, that teachers also need to be convinced that this is the right approach. You know, because why would they otherwise invest time and energy and resources into competence-based approach if they are not really, you know, convinced that this is the right approach? And that again comes back also, I think, what Elin said, no, the issue of assessment. And issues of formal assessment and what we assess, you know, and so there's also linked to that we have to rethink somehow also assessment and what we assess. So that also wanted to raise, the issue of assessment. And then indeed, I mean, just finally also to confirm that importance of certification and validation and the important part also at the European level. Now we have this initiative on micro credentials, and we have also in the new Europass. I don't know if you know the Europass, where there is this this was renewed since 2 years ago. And they have this do not only have the Europass CV, so people to be able to upload and have their CV there, but now it also offers opportunity to have a portfolio of your learning achievement. And this is a way towards what they call now the European digital credentials for learning, so that you would be able to store in your portfolio any recognition, any statement issued by any organization that you learned something. And I think that would be very important, so that people develop their own portfolios of their learning achievement. And then it links again to the technology as well, for example, to the blockchain, so that they can be on the blockchain. So if the learning organization disappears, you still have a record of your learning for the end, for the rest of your life, for the rest of so that's also important. So these things have to be connected, and I think that makes it indeed so difficult to make really progress. The learning content, the teacher guidelines, the certification, the assessment, and then finally, because that was related to your last question, the research. And I think research also need to step in to ensure that we can prove with evidence that this works. We should be able to demonstrate what works and what does not work in the area of competence-based learning, because we have to admit that certain things do not work in certain contexts, but for certain purposes, and for example, for certain age groups, it does not work. For other subjects, maybe it works. So we need also have good evidence to be able to also convince our teachers and also our policymakers that that it works, that it's efficient and effective and relevant to go for these kind of approaches. And that finally connects to industry. And there we need also to make the strong connections, because in the end, what does industry needs, and the industry needs to be involved in this shift of paradigm, towards competence-based learning and recognition of learning. Thank you. So these were a bit of my thoughts.
Thank you very much, Yves. I mean, you really pointed out the key elements that have also emerged from the various presentation, and definitely also the one about research. I think it is very much fundamental to give support to all the other points. I mean, the time is always running too fast, so I would like to invite Carlo, Oscar, Stefano, Arianna, and Elin. Please share your final thoughts. Unfortunately, we do not have much time. I would really love to listen to you for hours. Please open your microphone. And
okay. I think so that in general, we could say that there is a general convergence among the different intervention of all the panelists. But I detect one possible criticality when we are referring to industry. Of course, we should give value to the acquisition of competences. Of course, it should make value, should be relevant also for the society and also for industry. But for example, what has been said by Stefano when he was describing the 150 people that was coding in a given contest. This, from one side, said us that they were in a flow state. They were fully merged into what they were doing, and so they reached what is called flow state, or by Mealha. But at the same time, this is also, in some sense, the evidence of a risk, because, for example, when you are dealing with the people that would like to code, okay, they wish to code immediately to start to code. So they wish immediately, they do not start from a planning, they do not start from a critical analysis, they do not start from a problem setting. So in this sense, you see that we are trying to make an effort to define competences, to define which competences are relevant, to try to bring them into the school, into university, into the academy, into the world, into the society. But then from the other end, there will be always people that try to find a different path that actually do not consider what has been said. So, I mean, that, for example, knowledge are the basis of skill, and the skill are the basis of competence, and so on. So this could be a critical aspect for the future. Of course, companies are interested that people are able to do things. They do not care if they know something. They do not care if they are, let's say, really, in some sense, competent. Although they are, of course, interesting that these people are able to reskill very, very quickly. So, you know, I hope that I was able to explain the criticalities that I intercept.
Maybe I can quickly interact after Carlo provocation.
Yes,
what I found extraordinary was that these kids, 13, 14, 15 years old, instead of doing something else in their free time in the afternoon, they were attracted to go in this venue and work and solve problems that they were confronted and overcome challenges, not only in coding, but in different aspects. But this gives me the opportunity to also, in a way, try to answer about what Liliana was saying. I think it is very difficult to find the right balance. I think a competence-based education is not new concept. When you invited me, I reflected that about maybe 30 years ago, in my first traineeship at IBM UK, I proposed them a competence-based analysis of their training activities. So still, I think it is the way forward, but it's not easy to put in place an educational offer which is competence-based as a good sound pathway, and also in terms of pedagogics is attractive, is effective. In a way, it's challenging, because we know also in adult education that the majority of people that attend training programs are not really queuing outside in order to do it, because mainly of time contingencies, but also many other aspects. So putting in place a competence-based approach, which also is attractive and flexible, is not easy to do, but it is the way forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stefano. Oscar, Elin, Arianna, would you like to?
Just two quick.
Yes, please.
Two quick words. One, to thank all the panelists here for. I learned a lot with you today. Yves, our keynote for the I didn't know all the details that you brought today for us. It's nice to get it all in one place and so quickly, and by an expert like you. Thank you, Yves, very much for your contribution for us here today. Well, we've listened to a lot of inspiring people a long times that education is the solution. Getting back to motivating the teachers, motivating a lot of actors in this process. I think if education doesn't get correctly into place in the system, democracy is at stake. It will always be at stake. So I think the solution is to get education for all. The competence paradigm will take its time to get into the system, but I believe it's the way of really getting to everyone during their lifetime. So thank you all for your contribution. Thank you all. I learned a lot with you today.
Thanks a lot, Oscar. Arianna, Elin?
Yeah, maybe I would like to stress the relevance of teacher training, initial training and continued training to support them in fostering competencies. I have been a teacher trainer and I have invited teacher to put in place, let's say, cooperative learning, but I was doing it frontally. I was saying you have to learn how to teach and to leverage cooperation among students, but I was not teaching by example, let's say, So I think that it's very, very important that we shift the way of we teach teachers and give them also the pedagogical tools to really have the opportunity of put in place what we consider that pedagogically is the more effective way to promote meaningful learning in learners.
Thank you.
That's also the relevance that we are giving to create these massive online courses, but also to share practical tips on pedagogical way of implementing competence-based education.
Thank you very much, Arianna. Elin?
Yeah, I think I would agree with Arianna. I completely agree that teacher training is key for this. It really is, to support next practice, future practice, professional reflection towards just improving practice, little tweaks, big tweaks, major tweaks. But I would add, it's got to be system change. We have to change how we value what schools do, how schools do it, and the outcomes they demonstrate from a human perspective and from a community perspective. And this is where hearing things like 3.5 million selfie users is brilliant. That's just fantastic. It's people are looking to innovate, looking to see how to change. We've had a huge response to EduComp, our teacher training, from countries that you wouldn't think to get many applications from and really good participation from. So there's so much hope, but system change has to support the interest, the passion, the commitment of educators, and research needs to underpin that. This is where the 3.5 million selfie users, that level of data can be used to really make a convincing argument, a lot for sustained, proper change of how we value education, how we value how our young people learn and what they learn, and the skills and attributes and competences they come out with, as well as the knowledge, which is important, that underpinning knowledge, but the ability to apply that knowledge through these kinds of competence and navigate life is hugely vital right now for our democracy and our continued survival, I think, really. Resilience, survival, democracy, being human. Thank you.
Thank you so much to each of you. Thank you to the really a very, very rich and interesting session. I really thank you, each of you, each panelist, and also the audience. Thanks a lot. And I would love to stay much more, but I hope that, there will be other opportunities. So thank you very much also to Carlo and the ASLERD conference for this great opportunity of exchange. Thank you so much.